Hello and welcome to Cricket News. I am Rahul Pandey, and it's a special moment right now. It's a special record. It's a special conversation that's going to take place right now. Let's talk about India South Africa, shall we? Because the first test is just around the corner, and we need to understand that India South Africa is a series that is historically quite relevant, and you will know more about it if you don't already in this conversation that's going to take place at Cricket News exclusively. And let's go back to 1997, shall we? Second test in the series. India have already lost in Durban. And let's talk about what South Africa have done in Cape Town. They scored 529, and India following up upon 166, not 166, 166 in Durban, now have to respond to South Africa's mammoth total after being 58 for 5. 58 for 5. What followed was a book of great significance that talked about a partnership of great significance. This was Sachin and Azhar in Cape Town. And I'm delighted to be joined by the co-authors, by the two authors of this particular book, Mr. Arunabha Sengupta and Mr. Abhishek Mukherjee. Hello, gents. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. A bit cold. It's -2 in Amsterdam, but yeah, got used to it.
Well,
It's also
Abhishek,
cold
that's
in
relatively
Kolkata, but
warm.
I won't. Yeah, relatively warm. But yeah, it's threatening to approach 10. So
Wow, threatening. That's brilliant. I'm in Delhi, so I'm kind of in the middle of the temperatures between Netherlands currently and India. But let's talk about what we are here to talk about. Brilliant book right here, if our viewers can see it. Fantastic book if you haven't read it. It's something that you need to read, and what better time to read than now when we have an India South Africa series around the corner, and not just any India South Africa series, mind you. Let's talk about what makes this one particularly interesting. When India played the third test in Cape Town during this series, the partnership that we are going to talk about would complete what, 25 years?
25 years, yeah.
Yeah. And this, since the book was published, will be the first India South Africa series, let alone the first India tour of South Africa, if I'm not wrong.
yep.
Yes. So I am doubly honored in that way that you two have joined us for this conversation today. But let's start with the most obvious question of them all. What took you, and how did you get to the idea of writing this particular book?
Yes, so Abhishek and I have worked together for a long time, and we go a long way back in the sense that we graduated from the same university and so on. When we worked for Cricket Country, we both had our own columns and all that. But what we did sometimes was to make this. We had an outlet for something that everybody wants to do, that is all-time 11s, and we had an official outlet for that. And to make these all-time 11s, we did it in a slightly different way. That is, we discussed in a dialogue fashion and came up with the teams involving all the statistics and all that, and then published that in Cricket Country. Now, those dialogues we did in Google Chat because we were separated across two different continents. And for a long time, we had thought that something needs to be done about this partnership because this is an incredible partnership. And secondly, this is not that much talked about because, as it is mentioned in the book, it falls in a kind of black hole when this web-based reporting had not yet come to the full extent, and newspaper reporting was there, but it was kind of going towards an ebb, actually. So, and obviously it was in South Africa, and there were no British journalists present, which always affects the hype and the lore and all the things that are written about it. For example, we never stop hearing about the 185 by Mike Atherton, and we think that that was the only innings he played. That was not so. All right. So we always thought about doing something about it in a different way. And we thought this was a particularly interesting way of writing the book because this dialogue format, because we were used to it. And secondly, the coronavirus that also gave us a chance because we had some time to kill. And that was a way of bringing about the book. And we shifted from Google Chat. So we used shared office. No,
What is
online.
it called? Google Docs.
Google Docs, yeah. Google
Yeah.
Docs. And basically, it was as good as having a dialogue online. We seldom spoke to each other. We just had, we just wrote.
So basically, he wrote his bit, I wrote my bit, and we edited each
Yeah.
other's copies. That's how it went.
Wow. That's a partnership in itself. And you're talking about a partnership. So we're kind of living in this Inception sort of world, which I think Christopher Nolan would love to know. But it's fantastic when you read the book that, and now that I know how the process of writing the ASAM in the ASAM way went by, it's really brilliant. But as you mentioned, as I've seen Abhishek talk about this book in another interview, a lot of the history of the game is from an Anglo-Australian perspective. And in the book itself, in the beginning, it has been mentioned about how the distribution of cricket books itself is different when it comes to the West, when it comes to Australia, India, and South Africa. How difficult was it then for you to not the source material, but to procure leads to talk about particular things that have been mentioned in the book?
Yeah, first of all, touching upon the Anglo-Australian bias or Anglo-Australian way of telling stories, I'll give you a simple example. Mid-1950s, for example. There was this Coronation Ashes, 1953. Yeah, when Queen Elizabeth, who is still there, who's still around, she came to the throne. There was coronation, and there was the Ashes, Hutton's England playing against Hassett's Australia, and there were about 13 books on that Ashes series that was written, and everybody thought that Ashes, because of all the books written and all the sentimentality that is associated with that, everybody still believed that that was one of the most keenly contested series that went on. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the very next season, previous season, 52-53, Indian team traveled to West Indies. And that was a remarkable series from the point of view that was also a 5-test series which ended 1-0, like the England-Australia series in 1953. Plus, India played brilliant cricket, which was not quite expected at that time, including the fielding was superb, Indian fielding. Plus, it was a meeting of two countries who had never visited each other, and they had so much in common, like the Guyanese, the Trinidad. There were so many Indian people who were there, who had never seen or who had a lot of interlinked history with the Indian population. And when they came there, they were immensely popular. And there is not one book that has been written about that series. So you see the skew in the storytelling. So when we have to go down deep into researching this sort of countries which are like not England and Australia, we have to dig deep. And digging deep in the sense that we have to go through newspaper articles, we have to go talk to certain reporters who had been present at that time, and we have to go into some books which are not very easily procurable as well. And luckily, this innings was available on YouTube as much as we could watch it repeatedly. So these were all the different sources that we had to go through. And Abhishek might add.
We asked, even the Indian media houses did not send many representatives. I asked some senior journalists, and every senior journalist pointed us towards Mr. G. Vishwanath, who covered this. So he was probably the only senior journalist who was there. So, and as the South African media, it's very difficult to find access to South African and New Zealand media. So, yeah, we found access to some cricketers.
Yeah, for example,
Protagonists was there. Lance Kusner and Paul Adams were helpful.
Dilip Vengsarkar had gone there to report the tour.
Yes.
And he had a brief conversation with us. Apart from that, I think Harsha was there helping out. But other than that, we did not have too many leads from that angle. It all had to be reconstructed.
So the videos were there, and there were some extensive videos, and other than that, basically finding sources and reconstructing the story, as Aruna was saying.
The book, as it reads in the beginning itself, now that you've talked about the video, it's sort of an intriguing question to me as to how you covered the other aspect of the book. The book, as it reads in the beginning, is dedicated to three individuals, to three protagonists of the story: Nelson Mandela, Sachin Tendulkar, and Mohammad Azharuddin. And two different sides of the book, if that's what I've seen while reading it, are one talking about the partnership, and the other talking about the sort of societal image of South Africa then, what cricket meant to South Africa at that particular time period, what India-South Africa cricket meant at that particular time period. And was it difficult for you to separate those two narratives, to sort of separate cricket and the other side of the book, or was it something that was only natural with the storytelling?
We didn't try. We wanted them. We didn't try to separate sports from politics, because they are not separate. They cannot be and should not be separated.
Yeah, but still there are people who think these two should not mix and match. But that's an obsolete way of thinking. I mean, cricket and society, they're always together. The history of cricket reflects, not exactly, but to a great extent, history of any sport does that.
Yeah. And it's only natural because they're being played by people who are part of the society, who have their own views of society. And it's only natural for the game to be part of the society as well, the sport to be part of the society as well. But let's talk about some of the intricacies of the book. Let's start with sort of the three different eras in which cricket can be seen in South Africa. The first of them, cricket in the pre-apartheid era. Heard about and it's been mentioned in the book as well, the South African team that beat Australia 4-0 in 1969.
You mean the pre-ban era? Apartheid was there.
This was the pre-ban era, beg your pardon. Then there was an era in which the rebel tours took place. And then there was the post-apartheid era in which the India-South Africa series in 91, in 92, and then this particular series. What were your observations of these three different eras and how the first two sort of was seen in the third era?
Firstly, one of the major unknown facts which we disclose in this book, and which I also disclosed in the earlier book, was that, or not disclosed, but made it more widely known, was that this was not the first meeting of South Africa and India. Like after 1991, this was not the first meeting. There was a group of Natal Indians, South African Indians, who had come to play in 1921. And that was way before this banning and unbanning and all that. So, and that particular story, that's again a brilliant story, and it's a historically very, very impactful story that is not really recognized or not really very well communicated. And even now, it is not very well accepted as something that is important by the.
We just completed 100 years of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100 years ago, they were here in India.
Yeah.
They were here in India, and there were a couple of players called Billy Subban and Maharaj, who actually played for Mohan Bagan. They were recruited into the Mohan Bagan team, cricket team, and played for Mohan Bagan. And Mohan Bagan, if you know, it's a very traditional club, and they refuse to like recruit foreign players. And the known fact is that the first foreign player they recruited was Chimao Keri in 1991. Yeah, that was the Nigerian footballer. Now, it is actually wrong because they recruited 2 South Africans to play for them in 1921. So this is a historical nugget, which is extremely interesting, because suppose we find out that Yorkshire actually played somebody way before Sachin Tendulkar, that would have been a really like path-breaking discovery. It's just that Mohan Bagan, it's not recognized that way in the cricket world. But anyway, so the history is pretty interesting, because there was this period till 1970 when there was no link with any non-white nation. The South Africans played with only England, Australia, and New Zealand. And they had a team, all know that. They were great cricketers. Graham Pollock, Barry Richards, Mike Proctor, all of them were really, really great cricketers. And then there was the ban, and there were the rebel tours, as you said, and they recruited several good and some not so good players to go there and play there. And then again, in 1991, when Mandela was released from the prison, they were like fast-tracked into rejoining the international fold. Now, one of the things that we mention in the book is that this history that we know is, again, very partial, because there were a lot of other cricketers, non-white cricketers in South Africa, who were at least good, if not equally good, and we never hear of them. So Basil D'Oliveira was only one who went to England and managed to make his mark and play international cricket. His talent saw the light of the day, and that was also 10 years after his actual peak. So he should have been one of the best batsmen of the world at his peak, but he had to wait till he qualified for England and went through the entire qualification process. And then he played at an advanced stage, but still averaged more than 40 in Test cricket. And so he was a brilliant, brilliant player. And there were some equally brilliant players, Cecil Abrahams and Abid brothers, Talib Salih, Frank Roro. We don't know of them, but we kind of lament the way the Barry Richards and the Graham Pollocks were victimized because of this apartheid, which is right. They were great players, and the world should have seen more of them. But we must remember that the other untold story as well, that these cricketers never saw the light of the day. From 1970 to 1991, there was, again, the rebel tours happened. And slowly, the society changed so that 1 or 2 colored cricketers were added to the fold, just to make sure that the world saw that things were changing in South Africa, and they were given the status back in the international fold. But again, in that era, there is something very interesting, which may not have been highlighted so much in the book, that we live in certain silos in the world. If you ask somebody from India, they have certain amount of opinions about cricket, which with the globalization, it has changed. People see all sorts of cricket. But if you just ask somebody from a bit older times, there will be local heroes who will have achieved superpowers, and they would have been the best ever. Yeah. If you ask somebody from the 70s, maybe the spin quartet or Gavaskar and Vishwanath, they were much better than anyone else, and which is very logical, not logical, but very understandable, because you are not seeing the entire world how they played cricket. If you ask the South Africans of that particular era, of 1970 to 1991, the ones who had their prime during those times, and South African cricketers, spectators, they will give you a completely different picture of the game. So you won't hear so much about the Gavaskars or the Imrans, you will hear of the Lawrence Rose and the Graham Pollocks and the Mosleys, all the people, Clarks and Crofts, who had actually traveled there. So that's a completely different worldview that you can see among those people. So after the release of Mandela and after the fast tracking, there was a different era altogether. It started, and 1991 that saw the first Indian team to travel there. And then also they traveled with passports which said that not valid in Republic of South Africa. That was still not valid, but they managed to get diplomatic immunity and travel. So it's very interesting the way the eras flowed into each other. And then suddenly India-South Africa relationship became very, very prominent. And as Abhishek will point out as well, this is the only series, bilateral series, which is named after two non-cricketers, but two very, very important people.
Yeah. And it's because Abhishek, please do it.
First of all, in 2021, I find it really difficult to believe that there existed times when it was considered normal for a country to play three oppositions and not play three others. And still, and that was considered normal and allowed. In 1961, South Africa went off the Commonwealth. As per existing ICC laws, their matches in the 1960s should not have got test status. So in England, Australia, and New Zealand voted for them, the only countries who had been playing. India, Pakistan, West Indies obviously voted against them. But they stayed. The 1960s South Africa matches get test status. That should not have happened. They still have test status. That should not have happened. I mean, that has still not been rectified. I mean, it is. Can you imagine a team in contemporary cricket refusing to play half the oppositions based on skin color, no other reason? And that was considered normal. I mean, today I find this very difficult to believe, first of all. But what makes it even more unbelievable is what exactly was going on in South Africa at that point. Cricket was among the least of the worries. I mean, we have touched upon the discrimination, the laws, the apartheid laws, barely touched upon at some points. But it is typically we have a vague idea of about the discrimination in South Africa, but nothing concrete. The more we read, the more we learn, and the more we are. Speaking personally, I was in shock about how this was allowed to happen for years, for decades, and the world sat still. India, mind you, despite India have a long shared history with South Africa, and India had among the strongest anti-apartheid stances. The 1974 Davis Cup, neither India had to travel to South Africa to play the final. India had not won a Davis Cup until then. India have still not won as of 2021 the Davis Cup. In 1970, South Africa had also not won until then. So India had a serious chance. India chose not to travel. India chose to give a walkover to South Africa in the final of the Davis Cup. Not a first round match, but India's stance was that strong. But the moment the apartheid government fell, South Africa started believing in a normal society. India were the first team to host them. and India were the first team to tour them.
Yeah.
9 years after hosting the 1987 World Cup, India got to host the World Cup again in 1996. That would not have been possible had South Africa not voted for India. So, yes, I mean, particularly in the early 1990s, as India opened up to a more liberal economic policies, and South Africa adopted a normal social policies, you'll see both countries, how do you say, open up at roughly at the same time, and cricket in for both countries also opened up at the same time.
Yeah.
So, and this was in the first half of the 90s, and which adds to the importance of this particular period.
Yeah. Yeah. I've shared this with Abhishek, but I want to share this with you as well. Now, one of my favorite moments in the book is when you describe Nelson Mandela's arrival to the stadium and wearing his silk Mandela shirt and the reception that he got. Then there's this very interesting story of when the former Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, visited him in the prison. And the first question Mandela asks of him, I mean, not to give away spoilers to those who haven't read or haven't heard about the incident as well, but these are sort of incidents when you look at what he talks, his relationship with cricket, when you look at his relationship with rugby and his relationship with football as well, which we all followed in the 2010 FIFA World Cup. It's not just like he was looking at this as a tool, as sports as a tool to unite people, but he had this innate interest in the sports as well. He was really into the games. He was really a fan of the sport, and it just really touches you in different ways when you read the book as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at Mandela's interactions with, first of all, Makai Ntini, I mean, he always tried to make him realize that he was one of the examples for the people who had been deprived for so long. But at the same time, he also spoke to Lance Klusner in Zulu. So he was a great unifying figure. And when he talked about whether Don Bradman is alive, the only test matches that he had seen before that were again from the cage, what they used to call the cage. The discrimination went all across the society, right? So when South Africans were hosting other countries in test cricket or any other sport, there used to be separate enclosures called cages where the colored people were supposed to sit. The whites were seated separately. So that was from where these Nelson Mandela watched cricket. He talked about discrimination during the apartheid period, and well, lots of them, like 90 days without any question, police could actually imprison you on suspicion, and then they used to, there would be no inter-race activities, interracial marriage or relationships. They were strictly forbidden, and you could be jailed, you could be deported, you could be tortured. But apart from that, there are these sporting stories like Papua Sergula. If we move away from cricket and we touch golf, he was again an Indian, South African Indian, who worked as a caddy because that was the closest he could get to the golf course. And he was discovered as a phenomenal talent, and he went and won the Dutch Open in the 1960s 3 times. And then he was allowed to participate in the Natal Golf Open, which was not allowed for the non-white people. And there he won it, but he couldn't use the clubhouse. He had to have his lunch in his car, not his car, but his manager's car. He didn't own a car, he was too poor. And because it was raining, the trophy was just shoved into his hand through the window because he was not allowed in the clubhouse. Yeah, well, the rest of the players, they were in the clubhouse enjoying, celebrating. So you hear of such stories, and then he died a pauper's death. He even beat Gary Player, who was the golf superhero of South Africa. So there was such a lot of this sort of division in the society. And when Mandela, like really, he did not use, like, it was not that he was using sports as his only main tool to get equality in the society, but it was very much one of his several goals, you know. And if you see Invictus, that is the idea that comes across.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of my biggest upsets as a sports fan is that I haven't seen that movie yet, but you get the image, you get that image. I remember watching the 2010 FIFA World Cup final. It's one of the best organized FIFA World Cups of all time, even though South Africa isn't a strong team. That's sort of like a World Cup, not just for South Africa, but for the continent itself. And then when Nelson Mandela arrives to the Soccer City Stadium in that golf caddy during the final, the reception that he gets with the Vuvuzelas, and it would be a blasphemy, as Abhishek would say, if I don't mention Vuvuzelas in the discussion when we talk about the 2010 FIFA World Cup. But you get that picture of the man himself, and it's really wonderful to read those bits in this particular book, even though, you know, as we've talked about, the book has two narratives, and then the other narrative is of the partnership that took place. Not the longest of partnerships, Abhishek, when we talk about partnerships, even in Indian cricket history, we sort of think of the Dravid and Lakshman partnership, the big one that sort of lasted for a long time period so that people remember that. But this one, the thing that makes it different is that it lasted for what, about 2 hours?
40 minutes, 40 overs. 40 overs.
And it wasn't supposed to happen with the events that had taken place previously in the series. Someone would have easily... Yeah.
Until then, India had scored 224 runs and lost 15 wickets in the series. 224 runs.
25 wickets.
Yeah, 25 wickets. So 224 runs, 25 wickets. That's less than 9 wickets, 9 runs a wicket. And then they added 222 runs, so almost doubled that amount. So 224 until then, and 222 they added in 40 overs. And when we think of great partnerships, typically we have either two slow, steady batters or one aggressive batter and the other plays a support act. And here we had attack at both ends against 4 world-class fast bowlers. I mean, Donald and Pollock. Donald and Pollock, I mean, we don't need to talk about them we don't need to explain their legacy, but Macmillan and Klusner also have terrific numbers. And Paul Adams actually has one of the best numbers among wrist spinners against India, far better than Shane Warne or Abdul Qadir. So this was the bowling attack. There was no weak spot. And they were playing at home. And they were 58 for 5. So, I mean, it was as improbable as it goes. And then they start. I mean, the shots Tendulkar played was still believable. I mean, you could see, but Azhar was in a completely different zone. Towards the end of the innings, you'll see, if you look at the videos, after one of the shots, bizarre shots Azhar plays, Alan Donald's face, the expression, you get the feeling that he has given up. He doesn't know where to bowl. And until then, Donald had been tormenting the Indians throughout. I mean, since his international debut, Donald has always done well against India. But that one expression will tell you.
Yeah. And it wasn't just all-out berserk shots on display. There were proper cricketing shots wherein the Hyderabad wrists would come into play. Sachin, as you said, played some of the shots, some of his vintage shots in during that innings, the on-drive, the off-drive as well. So it really was some partnership. And I do believe if Twitter would have been there would have been some reception on that platform as well. The Bird app would have gone crazy, as we can say, when we look at it in the context of the modern game and the modern Twitter users as well.
That reminds me, a few days ago, someone asked Azhar on Twitter
Okay.
And what were Tendulkar and Azhar discussing when they met in the middle of the pitch during the partnership? So Azhar responded that there was no discussion and there was no meeting. We were only hitting boundaries.
I think you retweeted this. I think you
Yes.
retweeted this. Yeah, that's brilliant. Arunabh, your takeaways from that partnership?
I mean, uh, we have revisited the partnership regularly, right? So what happens with our memories is that we tend to think that we remember most of the strokes that we see, we are delighted by, but we generally juxtapose between matches and like we think that this had happened in this match will actually take place in another match. So, but for this match, we went through the videos about 1,000 or a million times, so we every stroke they played in this particular video that's embossed in our minds. And what we remember from the time we had seen this innings is that the feeling of disbelief and elation that we were like feeling at that time, like it was totally unbelievable because, as Abhishek said, it was like attack from both ends and with backs to the wall. Right, we never expected that such a turnaround could happen. Abhishek mentioned
Hmm.
that stroke, that other hooking Donald with disdain and almost off his front foot, and that was like in front of mid wicket, I think, and that was like Donald's face told you the entire story. And Tendulkar, till Azhar was there at the wicket, he was scoring more or less equally briskly, but he was kind of playing more cricketing shots. But you can imagine that when we say cricketing shots and bring Tendulkar into the mix, they are more than cricketing shots. Like a normal human being may not be able to really contemplate those strokes to those kind of balls. And that was the thing that distinguished Tendulkar and Azhar from the other batsmen, that they could hit bad balls for boundaries. But
Yeah.
once Azhar was out, especially the stroke that took Tendulkar to 150, it was Donald bowling with a new ball, and it was pitched perfectly on the good length and not enough room. And Tendulkar played a cover drive with disdain, complete disdain, and like there was no support at the other end at that time because Azhar was already covered. He
Hmm.
just went through with his shot, and it was like,
And Donald couldn't even sledge at the other end.
yeah, because it was Tota Ganesh at the other end, so he didn't understand what he was saying. So Tendulkar told him that he doesn't understand Hindi, let alone English, so you have to learn Kannada to sledge him.
Wow.
Although now he's quite
Ah.
quite articulate in English.
Yeah. 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 And it was sort of a freak end to this partnership, which, freak might not be the right word to, freak can be the right word to talk about the partnership, but it was a freak end to the partnership itself, a run out. And when you talk to, a lot of people in the book who were there, Doda Ganesh himself as well, but what was the kind of reception from the people who were watching it live? What were their thoughts on watching this particular partnership live?
Robin Jackman was on air. He said, "This is this is unlike any cricket he has seen before, or this is unlike
I
any
have never
batting he
seen
has seen before."
a cricket played like this,
Yes.
played in this way. And he also said that after two consecutive boundaries, he said, "What will we get if these two continue to bat throughout the day? 800?" Said something like that.
Yeah, that's I think that's sort of a partnership that someone like a Rishabh Pant would like to go and rewind and watch
I
again.
think
Yeah, actually,
I think
the
Rahul and Pant did
Yeah.
something similar at the Oval in 2018.
yeah, it was also a
Yeah. Yeah.
remarkable partnership. Only thing about it is that even with these superior bats that people have these days, they couldn't match that run rate. The
Yeah.
run rate was a bit lower than what Sachin and Azhar managed, but it was
Yeah.
equally remarkable partnership, and again in a losing cause.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about all the things. I mean, the bowling attack, the conditions that were more favorable to, of course, the home side, and then against the run of the play, makes it quite remarkable to believe that this happened. Another thing, another interesting precursor to the partnership is the Sachin Tendulkar Mohammad Azharuddin relationship itself, and sort of makes it even more interesting for someone who's reading the book for the first time, or the portrayal of the relationship itself sort of makes it interesting for someone who's reading the book for the first time. What were your thoughts on that side of the story, the Sachin Azhar relationship in the 90s?
You trusted the stories as much as you trusted Indian media.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So we have not really dwelt on the relationship as such. We have just said that there was some tension because captaincy had changed hands very often, and there was some tension which was either true or like projected as such in the media. That's
And in India, captaincy seldom changes without drama. I don't know why. I mean, Dhoni made it really easy by retiring out of the blue, but the others, I mean, if you replace a captain, it invariably involves drama.
Yeah, we have had 4 captains in the series in 1959, and when I was actually growing up as a kid, like Gavaskar, Kapil, like people talked about them all the time. The kind of like bad blood that was bred between them because of the changing captaincy and all that. But
we've heard of captains being changed on flight as well after the 79 World Cup.
Yeah.
Announcement being made from the captain.
Same.
Yeah. Yes, it's been dramatic, of course. But talking about the individuals you talked in the process of writing this book, one of the iconic figures, Clive Rice, and his role in taking South African cricket forward post the apartheid era. What were your takeaways from that conversation? Because that must have been some pressure to think of.
So Clive Rice, obviously, when we wrote the book, he had already passed away, unfortunately. And but I had spoken to him in a long interview for Cricket Country. And what he told us, or what he told me, was that when South Africa returned to the fold and they had all come to India, they had flown into India, and they were quite apprehensive because India, as Abhishek mentioned, right from the days even pre-independence, they were anti-apartheid in a big way. And the Indian crowd, especially the Calcutta where they landed, Calcutta had a history of communist rule as well in the state, and they were like combustible. There had been several riots in the city, and when Australia had come in the late 60s, there was a protest against Doug Walters, who was like, there was some speculation that he had been in the Vietnam War. There was no guarantee that like people were not, they had no evidence, but there was some speculation, and that led to a near riot. So when they reached the Calcutta airport, Dum airport in Calcutta, they were really apprehensive about the kind of reception they would get and whether they would be like barracked or even like something worse. And what Rice tells me is that, or told me, is that when he reached and when the players got on their bus, it was quite unbelievable because it is late at night, but people had lined up along the streets all the way from the airport to the hotel in the center of the city, which is a long
That's a long distance.
And they had lined up just to welcome them, to cheer them. And that was the most emotional moment for him. And there is a very famous photograph of Clive Rice emerging on the Eden the following day with 100,000 spectators around. They had never seen such a like amphitheater, such an arena, and he's just folding his hands and joining his hands and just acknowledging the cheers. It was a remarkable experience for them as well.
Yeah.
And that series has another role, by the way. Until that series, the BCCI had no idea that cricket they could make money from live cricket. They actually paid Doordarshan to cover cricket.
Yeah.
So in this series, Ali Bakr actually offered BCCI money that, okay, this is what you can make. And they were really confused. They didn't even know how much to quote.
Yeah.
Within 5 years, BCCI had figured out, and they were on the verge of becoming the richest board in the world.
And that's how cricket spread to the remotest corners of the
Yes.
country as well.
Yeah.
Satellite TV.
Also, this was the third test series outside Asia that Indians got to watch from home.
Yeah, the New Zealand series of 93, 94 or
That
94.
was one test match, 94,
That was
95.
94, 95, one test match, and then the English tour, and then
96.
96, and then this one. Yeah, the third series.
Quite a lot of elements that come in this story. And you've talked about a lot in the book itself, but if I may kind of relate this to process of writing something which is much smaller, which is piece, for say, we try and cut out a lot of things even when we are writing, for say, 1,000-word piece. But when you were writing this book, were there elements that you wanted to add and then you thought, okay, they might not go with the narration of the story itself?
Yeah. So before this book, I'd already published one particular book about apartheid cricket in apartheid South Africa from till 1970, which ended in the Stop the 70 tour, which brought about the ban of South African cricket. So a lot of things were already written. So I was more under the dilemma, like both of us were under the dilemma of what to add and what to not add from there as well. But yeah, it's always a difficult question because, as we said right in the beginning, these are stories which are not really that well um, recalled. This the conditions in South Africa, the historic importance of the series, because it is not England, Australia, Ashes. These are not that well recalled. And there was always the tendency of us to talk more about it. And the other thing that really plagued us was as we were writing, as we had ended the book and we were looking for publishers and we got in touch with Pitch Publishing and all that, this entire Black Lives Matter scenario took off. And that was always something which we could add onto the book and keep on adding till today, whatever is going on right now.
So essentially, remember, I mean, the book was done, and then Fav du Plessis made that iconic quote: "All lives cannot matter until Black Lives Matter." So we had to make a couple of changes. Maybe had we had, I mean, now with the Yorkshire incident and several others that happened in 2021, when this year, this several sections could have been added. So, but there's no end to it, essentially.
Yeah, and it is a huge imbalance in the world, which will take a long, long time to end. And even now, even if you point out what the imbalance is all about, you cannot quite convince everybody because the imbalance that has gone on has a huge history and inertia, and people are not quite ready to come out of it even now. So
understand this: in 1979-80, Australia toured England for 3 test matches. England toured Australia for 3 test matches, and these were not given. These were considered not part of the Ashes. And one of the reasons they gave was this was too small a series. So 3 test matches. How big is Ashes that 3 test matches are not enough to decide who will have rights to an urn? I mean, is the Ashes that big?
especially
Given that there have been 3 test match Ashes series in the past.
And yeah, it's difficult to even now, if you look at it, Brad Hogg comes out, says that Ashes is bigger than any test championship. And when they say this, they believe it. So these beliefs are very, very difficult to eradicate. The world has moved on. In 1930, so I'll tell you something, that in 1938, at the Oval, Len Hutton scored 364. That was the world record. And he actually broke the world record of Wally Hammond, who scored 336 not out against New Zealand. But all the newspapers of that time reported that he had gone past Bradman's 334 because that was scored in the Ashes and that was considered the record to beat, not the world record. Yeah, that is acceptable in 1938 maybe because cricket started in 1877, maybe Test cricket started in 1877.
And honestly, Australia and England were the only teams, only strong teams of the
strong teams, and West Indies had made huge breakthrough even in the first 10 years, but they're not till to that level yet. And South Africa were always struggling at that time. But like 80 years down the line, if people have the same opinion, that's a bit of a problem because through these last 80 years, there have been all these countries, West Indies, India, Pakistan, like New Zealand, all these countries have been playing cricket and all of them have very, very rich histories. So,
and remember, New Zealand are the champions, and New Zealand and India were the finalists, and New Zealand and India occupy the top two spots in the World Test rankings. England and Australia are outside that, but Test cricket is probably the only sport that in where it is considered normal for the top two sides to play 2 Test matches and 2 lower ranked sides to play 5 Test matches, and still basically based on some random concept that it's not just another series, it's the Ashes.
Apart from that, Michael Vaughan, when England played against New Zealand and India recently, and they had this rotation policy, which we talked about just before the interview. And Michael Vaughan, he was quite pissed with the rotation policy and said that if England continue this rotation policy in the Ashes, it will be the end of cricket as we know it. Now, they have played against New Zealand, who are the world champions, India, who are the world runners-up. Rotation policy against them is still acceptable, but against Australia, who are not the champions, not the runners-up, it is not acceptable. Now, this is not something that is acceptable in my opinion, this point of view. But if you talk to some Ashes adherents, they will tell you it's history, it's tradition. Yes, it's history, but the other histories have almost caught up. They cannot be ignored.
And the Ashes have a long history because the ICC delayed the the full membership status of other countries, and England and Australia until 1993 held veto powers in the ICC. So essentially, England and Australia share a history because England and Australia did not allow other countries to play cricket. Yeah, I do not know how that makes sense.
ICC itself was called Imperial Cricket Conference.
Yeah.
Before it was renamed International Cricket Conference, it was Imperial Cricket Conference. So it was the empire, imperialism, and all that. So yes, that history in a lot of ways that's being dismantled now in other fields other than cricket. But you will see the amateur professional divide that had all that gone in into cricket earlier. Even now, there are more public school people in the English team than there were in the 1950s. So cricket is one of the final bastions of this particular mindset. And it is not easy to overcome that in a lot of ways.
As you've said, it will take time. Even if we talk about Test cricket, and this has been pivotal to our discussions during the India-New Zealand series as well, Arunabha Cricket News. We were talking about why India and New Zealand need a Test series that is, if not more than 5 Test matches, at least 5 Test matches. They are the best 2 teams in the world. Everyone wants to see them play, and it's obviously going to take some time because the world of cricket needs to get used to the idea that we now have a method that is uniform for all the teams to prove that they are the best in the world. It's not just dependent on one series. We have a 2-year cycle. And then based on that 2-year cycle and the team that does well in that 2-year cycle, we're going to have a world champion. And that champion and the runner-up deserves the credit that they should get. But yeah, given your discussions right now, I can see another nice book coming in, probably from the Google Docs method of you two talking about this bit. We would love to read that book as I have loved to read this particular book. And for all our audience who have joined us to watch this particular session. I would recommend, if you haven't read this book, please do read it. It's available on Amazon and pretty much every web outlet to book the books, to get a book from, is what I...
And across the world.
Yep.
That's important. That is pretty important. So you might as well, you should as well read it if you are to watch India, South Africa.
It's also available on Kindle for those who use the electronic readers.
That is brilliant. Brilliant indeed. Right then, our final discussion that needs to be done on this particular session is, of course, of the upcoming India tour of South Africa. What are your expectations from this tour, James?
India had never had a chance this good on the previous tour of South Africa. I'm not saying India are favorites, but this is India's biggest chance. In 1991-92, I had hoped, but that was probably because I had little idea how good the South African bowling attack is. But now, the Indian fast bowlers are fit. South Africa have lost Nautya. That may be a game changer.
South Africa has always been the most difficult place to travel for the teams in the last 3 decades or so. And that's, if we look at the records, especially of the batsmen who have traveled there, we'll find out. No wonder it's the final frontier for India. And I think this is their best chance as well. And primarily because India have never had a bowling this good. I mean, a fast bowling of this sort, a fast bowling lineup of this sort, we had only dreamed of it. Like, we would think that a fast bowling lineup of this sort would start with the Greenwich and Hens at the top of the order, you know. So, we only associate it with West Indian attacks and all that. So, this is really, really a very good chance, and I hope they will be able to pull it off.
Yeah, will be interesting. It will be quite fascinating to watch this three-match test series unfold, and we will be here at Cricket News to bring it to you. Thank you so much, Arunabha. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for joining us. This has been really a brilliant session for me to know the process that you two went from in order to write this brilliant book. And thanks to all our viewers for everything about cricket. Stay tuned to Cricket News.